Let's say Italy, St. Peter's, was converted to a mosque, like the Hagia Sophia. Let's say there are so many immigrants from East Asia that instead of handshakes, we bow like we do in Japan. That you no longer eat spaghetti, you eat dan-dan noodles. And let's say women started wearing Islamic clothing. White Italians only start making up a small minority of the country. Are you saying nothing would have been lost?
You should not continue to embrace internationalism or cosmopolitanism, ideas that might appeal to intellectual elites, but don't speak to the hearts and minds of ordinary citizens. If you use the language of patriotism correctly, you're going to win in politics. Make America great again. That's not the patriotic slogan.
Right. What would a patriotic slogan be?
Would be make America free again.
Elites today are often internationalists, globalists, cosmopolitans. These are people who want to accelerate immigration, who see little reason to preserve the race, language, culture, or even the nation state itself, who want you instead to be a citizen of the world. My guest today, Princeton's Maurizio Viroli, argues that this is extremely dangerous, if only for the fact that it gives rise to a counter-populist movement, nationalism. People who would elevate their race, religion, and culture above all others. As an alternative to both extremes, Viroli argues for patriotism, and we will spend this entire interview explaining what it is, how it is different from nationalism, and why it is the only solution for a rapidly globalizing world. Professor Viroli isn't just theorizing. I strongly encourage you to listen to the end of this interview, where he shares how, as a consultant for the president of Italy, Viroli himself helped win an election and implement the politics of patriotism in modern Italy today. Your advice to modernity can be summarized as to reject nationalism, but to embrace patriotism. So let's begin by differentiating these two ideas and why patriotism is to be preferred over nationalism.
I come from the tradition of democratic left in Italy. And one of the major tenets, typical tenets or ideas of the left was, generally speaking, adverse and hostile to patriotism. And I made the argument that there is a patriotism, there is in history, there has been in history an interpretation of patriotism as an ideal of liberty and emancipation. So I say to my comrades in the left, look, you should not continue to embrace internationalism or cosmopolitanism, because both internationalism and cosmopolitanism are ideas that might appeal to intellectual elites, but don't speak to the hearts and minds of millions and millions of ordinary citizens. Instead of continuing to proclaim cosmopolitanism or internationalism, comrades of all countries unite, you should try to uphold a language of patriotism that is congenial to ideals of social emancipation, especially because, I said to my friends in the left, such a language exists. It doesn't need to be invented. And so, to answer your question, I said, there is a tradition of patriotism, a language of patriotism that goes back to Roman antiquity, to the Italian Renaissance, to the Enlightenment, to the Italian Risorgimento, that tells you that to be a patriot means that you stand for the liberty and the dignity of your country. It's an ideal of justice, and it's not only perfectly compatible but it asks you to respect the liberty of all countries. And then I also explained that the language of nationalism emerged much later in history. It emerged in around 1766 in a book by the philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder. It teaches you that the most precious value that you as an individual should uphold and that governments should sustain is the cultural, linguistic, and religious oneness and homogeneity of a country. So, if we speak historically, we have a language of patriotism that has been primarily used in history as a language of liberty. And we have a language of nationalism that has been created, has been defended, has been taught as a language that focuses on the values of cultural identity, common memories, language.
Ethnicity, right.
Ethnicity.
To summarize for our audience, the object of patriotism is the republic. It's the form. It's the liberty of the state. The object of nationalism, it's agnostic to the form. It could be a monarchy, it could be a republic, it could be anarchy, it could be communist, it could be capitalist, as long as the ethnic, cultural, linguistic, religious identities are preserved, right?
You put it very well.
And let me give you a quote from your book. This is the book that you wrote, For Love of Country, on patriotism. I consider cultural, ethnic, religious oneness and homogeneity as vices. They do not make the republic stronger, nor do they help to forge citizens committed to liberty. On the contrary, they make the republic asphyxiatingly dull, soporific, and oppressive, and citizens narrow-minded bigots, intolerant, and boring. Therefore, we ought help to reduce, rather than invoke, identification with ethno-cultural values. We should not reinforce the Italianness of the Italians or strengthen their ethnic and cultural unity, but rather focus on the political values of democratic citizenship and present and defend them as values that are part of the culture of the people. I totally get where you're coming from, and I totally understand the atrocious histories of nationalism run wild. But I wonder if you, as this quote suggests, giving no value to national sentiments and the object of nationalist love is wise in the following sense. So I immigrated from China to Vancouver, and there is a specific district in Vancouver, it's called Richmond, okay? And there are so many Chinese immigrants there that all the signs are in Chinese, that there are more white people in certain parts of Beijing than there are in Richmond, to the point where whatever few remaining white people there left in Richmond have sued the government because they can't survive, they can't live in this context. And that, I suppose, an extreme case where liberty is totally preserved, right? But the ethno-cultural makeup has completely changed. So let me give you a thought experiment. Let's say Italy preserved its kind of liberal form, but let's say St. Peter's was converted to a mosque, like the Hagia Sophia. Let's say there are so many immigrants from East Asia that instead of handshakes, we bow like we do in Japan. Okay, let's say there were so many Chinese immigrants that you no longer eat spaghetti, you eat dan-dan noodles. And let's say that most of the women here started wearing Islamic clothing, right? And let's say that people whose grandfathers were Italians only start making up a small minority of the country. But crucially, for the thought experiment, complete republic, right? And everyone has democratic liberal values. Are you saying nothing would have been lost? Like your patriotic love for Italy would be no less in such a foreign land?
This is a magnificent argument. But I think I can defend my position on the left.
Perfect.
No, I have nothing against what the scholars call cultural values, the mores, the tradition, the religion. the food, the way of dressing, the way of saluting each other, in a word, what they call culture. I have nothing against the particular national cultures. Absolutely nothing.
Right.
All I am saying is that national particular cultures and traditions, they become better, they become more refined if you add with a plus sign to them the values of republican liberty. I mean, let me explain this.
Right.
We Italians, you see, we Italians, if we have kept our traditions, our mentality, our mores, our memories, even during the fascist regime. But if you live within a good republic in which individual liberties are preserved and social rights are respected, then your national traditions get enhanced, enriched. They don't risk to become expressions of docility.
Right.
Expressions of cultural obedience, renouncing yourself in order to be like everybody else. Authoritarian regimes, they tend to foster homogeneity, obedience, and docility. And there is no reason why. There is no reason why, in order to preserve your national identity, language, religion, and morals, and you need to give up liberty.
Right, right. But I guess what I'm trying to push you on is that it's valid to have nationalistic sentiments, yeah, towards all those things that you mentioned.
If nationalism means, as Herder meant it, that you're attached to your particular memories, to your own language, to your own religion, there is nothing wrong in that.
Right.
Unless you say, as long as I am allowed to preserve my traditions, my language, my religion,
I'm willing to give up my liberty.
Yes,
That's when
that's my point.
Right.
See, and the interesting example is the example of the United States, where the country where I have been living now and teaching since many years. I am also an American citizen, by the way. Well, I think it's difficult to deny that up until now, the United States have been a society in which cultural and political toleration, comparatively speaking, has been remarkable. Who can deny that in the United States there is a remarkable cultural and religious pluralism? So you don't need to sacrifice, let's say, national identities. In fact, Richard Roth and other scholars, they speak of, others too, of the United States as a nation of nations. So it's not, what I was criticizing was the nationalist position that tells you, as long as your cultural identity is preserved, as long as your memories, as long as your food, as long as your fashion, way of dressing, your language are preserved, everything is fine. No, as a patriot say, I want, in addition to that, the presence and the strength of democratic and republican institutions.
Right. So one of the claims you're making is do not trade off liberty for the sake of preserving the ethnocultural makeup.
Correct.
But I also want to push you that the object of patriotism is also not sufficient, right? As the example of Richmond, of the few white people remaining in Richmond is supposed to show. Like, you do agree that is an alienating existence. Mm-hmm. If you preserve your liberty, but then you lose all your ethnocultural makeup, mm-hmm. that is also an unenviable position.
Sure.
Right.
I don't see why I have to give up. You speak just correctly. You refer to your experience as a Chinese person. But I don't see why I have to give up my Italianness, whatever it means, in order to live as a free person and stand for ideals of justice.
Right, I see. Well, it's interesting you bring up the American example, and that you think that people's commitments to America either descriptively are or normatively ought to be to the Republican form. But there's also a distinctive Americana, right? There's a distinctive red, white, blue. There's a distinctive aesthetic, the monster trucks, the NFL, like KFC, like. And the counter argument there would be, yeah, it's a nation of nations, it's a mixing pot, but what people really, adhere to is the culture of America. Yeah.
Some do, some don't. I've been living now in the United States for many years. There are some Americans who are as critical about themselves, certain aspects of American culture. For instance, this fascination with military and political greatness that has been present in American history and is present right now. That's one way of being an American. But it is also perfectly American of, say, someone like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was no less American than the proponents and the founders of the Committee on American Activities that persecuted radicals and socialists and dissidents. So what I'm saying is that in the case of the United States, but also in the case of Italy, there are different ways of being an American, different ways of being an Italian. There is the Italy of Garibaldi, the Italy of Mazzini, of the Rosselli brothers, of the anti-fascist martyrs, and there is the Italy of the fascists who were not only persecuting political dissidents, but who were also praising imperial conquest and domination. There are different ways of being Italians. One has to choose.
I see. But, and this is why I quoted that quote from your book, it seems like you're saying the right thing that we should do is to detach Italian identity from the ethnocultural stuff and instead commit it to the democratic Republican idea, right? And my concern there is just whether that is sufficiently motivating enough. Like, can you get people to die, right? Or like in the case that they need to, in war, for example, over the abstract concept of a democratic republic in Italy? Or can you get them to die over, the heroes of Rome and yeah, so is it rhetorically motivating enough, this idea?
My patriotism would be, if I had the opportunity to teach it, and if I had the opportunity to inspire political leaders, would be extremely powerful.
Why?
Because I give you an example, because it has been, I have the evidence for this.
Oh, historically it has been already, yeah.
No, but I have an evidence from my own biography that I'm going to reveal it tonight. Between 1999 and 2006, I have been a consultant for the President of the Republic of Italy, Carlo Azeglio Ciampi. Was his name. The President of Italy, President Ciampi, had enjoyed an enormous popularity. But as a consultant, he wanted to consult me to give him advice on patriotism. And I said to the President that if he would decide to use the rhetoric of patriotism, the patriotism of the Risorgimento, the patriotism of the anti-fascist resistance, the language of the patriotism of liberty, he would have got an enormous consensus. The President accepted my suggestion, and you can see he used the rhetoric of patriotism, of the kind of patriotism that I had defended in my work. You have no idea of the success of his positions, his public speeches. One thing in particular, Italy we have a national holidays. One of our national is June 2nd. We celebrate the birth of the Republic in 1946. No? It was in the past, we used to celebrate it with a military parade, where the Italian troops would parade in Rome, Via dei Fori Imperiali. That tradition had been interrupted in the 70s. President Ciampi restored it, and I advised in favor. And so we had our troops again parading in Rome. In the first line, however, there were not the soldiers, but the representatives of the martyrs of the concentration camps and the anti-fascist associations. It was an enormous political success. I'm telling you this story to explain that if you use the language of patriotism correctly, you are going to be effective. You are going to win in politics. If you don't do this, and you're not capable of using your own language of patriotism, the result is that the nationalists are triumphing. And look at the world as it is now. What do you see? From America to Italy to Russia, do you see the language of the patriotism and liberty triumphing? Or do you see the language of nationalism?
Yeah.
Remember what President Trump has in his is MAGA, Make America Great Again. That's not a patriotic slogan.
Right. What would a patriotic slogan be?
Would be M-A-F-A, Make America Free Again.
Right, I see. Because the nationalist needs a narrative of superiority.
Power. See, in what all the theorists of nationalism, starting from the 18th century onward, they all they were realists. That is to say, the international context is a context of competition, rivalries, and wars. What we have to do is to make our countries strong, capable of winning where? In the effort of conquering Africa, colonies, or Asia, or Latin America. And from a military point of view, where is that you test? What is the test of the unity and the strength of your nation? Is war. Then you see whether or not you are a nation. So in our own times, we see everywhere the language of nationalism triumphing, either in the form of the pursuit of economic hegemony or territorial hegemony or war, or in the forms of persecution of intellectual and political minorities or immigrants, because you want again the oneness, the homogeneity.
I see. That's quite incredible, but let me start with perhaps the most surprising thing, which is that a political leader in the 21st century sought the advice of an academic, of a philosopher, a political theorist. That doesn't seem to happen that much anymore, right? And so I guess just biographically, I'm curious, how did that come to be? In some ways, you ended up like your favorite philosophical hero, Machiavelli, who's an advisor to princes.
Oh,
right?
yes, you're right. It happened in a very simple way.
But this time he listened to you.
On this respect. How did it happen? Simply because one of the advisors, permanent advisor of the president, showed President Ciampi my book. The book was in Italian, Per amore della patria, for love of country. He appreciated some ideas and invited me to have a conversation. And I shall never forget that day. The day was the most glorious day in my life, when President Ciampi was a very direct man, was a person who was talking was very good at listening, was very straight, very honest in his ways of speaking. He simply asked me to explain my idea about patriotism and the difference between Patriotism and Nationalism. I explained my position at the best of my capabilities, and he looked at me and said, "That's what I have always thought."
Right. And how do you craft a campaign around patriotism? Like, is it just using freedom, liberty, or yeah, tell me about that, yeah.
How you teaching, simply teaching. If you want to use to help citizens to abandon nationalism and to rediscover the best available patriotism, you have to teach it, to talk to them about what? Well, you have to use the most powerful instrument that we have available, history. Certainly in the history of almost all countries, certainly in the history of Italy, there are examples of citizens, of men and women who displayed an extraordinary examples of patriotism. In the past, when I was invited to speak to young students in schools or universities, at the beginning they were looking at me as if I were an alien, speaking of patriotism. But after an hour, the most common comment I used to receive was, "Professor, but nobody had told us this story before." When I invite the students to listen to the opera of Verdi, for instance, the choir Va Pensiero, I can see their eyes becoming excited because they make the experience of intellectual and moral transformation. They understand that there is a dignified and noble and generous way of being a patriot. So they are free from this alternative. Either you become a cosmopolitan citizen of the world, which is a noble idea, but is only for the elites, and becoming a nationalist. So what I was trying to do, I've tried to do for years, now not anymore, except when I teach in classes. I was trying to offer an alternative to both positions.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because what you did through historical interpretation, I think, is use the best parts of nationalism, right? This commitment to one's ethnocultural history in the service of patriotism. And because I was going to say, Machiavelli, I think, begins his Florentine histories saying, there are a lot of histories, but because it is our own, because it is our history. Or Rousseau, when he says that, says that the same song that you would listen to as a kid can make you move to tears when you're an adult. But me, I never listened to it as a kid. And so even the language of patriotism needs to be couched within the ethnocultural rhetoric of a people. Right, yeah.
Definitely. You are speaking of songs and music. But look, they are powerful instruments to touch the hearts and minds of people. Now, this is a line that I've used many times discussing with my colleagues who are supporters of cosmopolitanism. Which songs you, as a cosmopolitan, can you offer to people that would move them? So we have the European Union, right? We are proud, I'm happy about the European Union. But what are the memories, the shared memories of the European Union? What are the musics, the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven? Oh yes, that moves. That is, you don't move people general ideas or abstract principles. You have to present them in a familiar way. Even the most skeptical or cold persons, when they listen to Va Pensiero from Verdi's Nabucco, they are touched. And the generous people, then they get moved and they act. And they are prepared then to do something for their country.
Right. And this is why one of the questions I came coming in is, what is the purpose of the nation state if it's an adherence to abstract principle? And you just gave the answer. Is because for the ordinary citizens to be moved by this abstract principle, they need the national kind of connection, right? And so tell me about your views about globalism, cosmopolitanism. You said that this was a good thing, but only available for the elites. That's
Cosmopolitanism, yes.
That's quite a charitable reading. Some people just want to reject it outright. So tell us about your...
I had the opportunity to discuss in the past and to read the work of Professor Martha Nussbaum.
I interviewed her on this interview.
She's formidable, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she's the proponent of cosmopolitanism, as you know. She's a very passionate proponent of cosmopolitanism. And I always told them, your position is intellectually and morally perfectly defensible. But to be a cosmopolitan, it requires to be like you and me, professors who we speak more than one language. We have the opportunity and the means to travel. We have a culture that allows us to interpret and understand different cultures. But how many have these privileges? Very few. And remember that those who don't, those who cannot speak different languages but their own native languages, those who cannot travel, those who are compelled because of social conditions to stay all their lives in the same place, they're going to hate us. And because they think that we are privileged. And you know what they do? They become nationalists. And they are going to sustain political leaders who are telling them, you see these intellectual and cosmopolitan elites who they want to teach us how to live our life. No. Your way of life is the right one, not their way of life.
Right.
So we have to be extremely, cosmopolitanism is noble, is intellectually fantastic. I have the greatest respect, but it is weak from a political and rhetorical point of view.
Right. Well, and therefore, should even the elites subscribe to it? Because or should even the elites be patriots?
Exactly.
Even the elites should be patriots.
The elites should simply learn that there are different ways of being an elite. A president of the United States like Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they were magnificent examples of intellectual and social elites. Let's be frank, the Roosevelts, they were as elite as one can be. But nonetheless, they did use the language of patriotism in the most powerful way in moments in which American history could have taken one way or another. So my hope was to try to to inspire and to teach intellectual and entrepreneurial elites to be true patriots so that they could benefit their own country, and by making their own country better, to benefit the world without entertaining the hope of just forgetting their own countries and work for the world.
Right. But for people like yourself, where you are part of two countries, in citizenship and in, I guess now, attachment after so many years in America, how does patriotism work for someone like that? There's no immediate country to default to, yeah.
If you have a generous heart, you can love two countries.
Right, yes, I see.
And in different ways.
I see.
In different ways. The United States are the countries that has welcomed me. I owe the American University all my career. So I would be ungrateful if I did not feel loyalty for the United States. To be loyal doesn't mean that you're not that you are uncritical. I'm a severe critic of the United States. But so I am of Italy. But on balance, because I was born here, because my primary language is Italian, because here are buried my parents, because here I've lived my youth.
The attachments are here.
The attachments are stronger. My strongest attachments are here in Italy. There is no question about that.
Right.
I can, the language is a crucial factor. More or less, I speak English, but I don't understand English the way in which I understand Italian, and I don't speak English the way I speak Italian. If I could have given this interview in Italian, it would have been much better.
It's interesting, and luckily for you, the way you define patriotism, that the patriot ought also respect other countries, meaning that there's no conflict of patriotism to two countries.
Exactly.
Unlike nationalism, where there is superiority built in and it becomes uno solo, right? Exactly. It becomes competing. Yeah.
Exactly. But I can give you an example of what I mean. The Italian patriots, inspired by the teaching of Giuseppe Mazzini, the proponent of this patriotism of compassion, patriotism of liberty, patriotism, solidarity. They all fought for the liberty of Italy during the Risorgimento, between 1820 and 1870. But many of them, they also went to fight in Greece.
Right, against the Turks.
Exactly.
I see.
For the liberty of Greece against the Turks. Or they supported the fight of Poland, of the Polish people against the Russians. But not because they were internationalists, but because they were patriots.
Right, yeah. And what's really interesting here is that this kind of international, let's call it, support is different in character than communism, for example, right?
Good
because
for you.
In Canada, one of the most famous Canadians in China is called Patriot. He was a Canadian communist who went there in the Civil War, who was a field doctor and died, and he became a Chinese hero, a Canadian Chinese hero. But when the communists help each other, it is for the international order that they're building, whereas for the Italian patriots, when they help others, it's not to build an international order. It's simply to say, I love my country's liberty, and I want your country to have that too. So they still remain attached to the nation.
You're absolutely right. The ideal of international solidarity that I have been proposing and defending, my Republican patriotism tells you that you should be loyal to the liberty of your country and stand for the liberty and dignity of all countries. A communist would say you have to stand for the international emancipation of workers as indicated and led by communist parties.
I see. The last set of questions I'm going to ask you have to do with an observation you said about the different kinds of love that the patriot and the nationalist have. So the nationalist love is unconditional, whereas you said the patriot's love is charitable, but it's contingent. Mm-hmm. So what makes a nation worthy of patriotic love?
A country should deserve your love, meaning in order to be loved, the country must be lovable in the sense that it's free, in the sense it is generous to other peoples and other countries, it is tolerant, and it tries to provide social rights for the poor. So the country, as I said, must deserve your love. But it is also true that if you see that your country is unjust, is aggressive, is intolerant, you, as a patriot, you cannot just live.
Right.
Live either physically or intellectually. As a patriot, you have to try to work with your compatriots, or some of them, to correct the wrongs of your country.
But the love is unconditional then, right? Just like the nationalist.
Is a unconditional? No, it's conditional in the sense that you love your country, you love the ideal. That's unconditional, but the ideal could be different from reality.
I see, right, yeah.
But you don't follow a nationalist argument that says, as an old saying goes, my country, right or wrong? No. If my country is wrong, I am saying that is wrong, but I don't leave.
Right. So what does your theory have to offer to both immigrants and emigrants?
To the immigrants, I say, you should come to our countries, and you are welcome to preserve and continue and keep alive your cultural traditions. We are not asking you to forget where you're coming from and the culture that is attached to the place where you were born, but you have to add, like a plus sign, to your cultural identity the values of Republican citizenship. So you have to be prepared to accept duties, to respect the rights of others, to be loyal to the Constitution, and if need be, to serve the new country in which you are. As an American citizen, now I'm too old, but had I been younger, I could have been drafted.
What about emigrants? Is there any valid case of leaving a country?
Oh yes, there are very.
You left the country in some sense.
There are. I would so many young students, and I thank you for this, have asked me this question. Professor Viroli, we want to leave Italy because here we cannot have a career, we cannot raise a family. Here there is too much corruption. We want to go somewhere else. Normally what they do, they go to the United States, they go to France, they go to Germany, especially intellectuals. And to them I say, well, there is nothing wrong about your decision. I don't condemn your decision.
But I thought you said you shouldn't leave.
Yeah, but if they want to leave, wait, I have the answer. You should, as long as you can, stay here, because if you manage to change society, to make it more just, more equitable, more decent, then you live a better life here than the life that you would live
in a foreign land.
Foreign land, even if you are become a successful businessman or a successful professor. But if you cannot, you're not prepared to endure the sacrifices that it takes to remain, what I'm telling you is go, absorb the best of the culture of the countries in which you're living, and then consider also to go back or to do something for Italy.
Right. Which is kind of what you did with helping the president, right?
With helping, writing for newspapers, giving thousands of useless talks.
Yeah. I suspect that when you talk about defending freedom, it's not a kind of libertarian freedom that you are suggesting. So what is roughly your conception of freedom? Yeah.
I stand for a social democratic vision of liberty, whereby, as the Italian Constitution explains, civil and political liberties need to be enriched by what we call social liberty or social rights, especially the right of education, the right to labor, and the right to health care. These rights are important aspects of individual dignity, and without these rights, the simple right to vote or to speak your mind, they are impoverished.
I see. Final question. How is your kind of patriotic republicanism different from the ancient republicanism that was born out of, let's say, Aristotle?
Oh, it's very different, because my patriotic republicanism, like I said, is open to the ideas of international solidarity, and you don't find that idea of patriotism in the ancients, or not even in my hero Machiavelli, who wrote in one...
Right, the barbarians, right?
Yeah. He wrote, I love my country more than my soul, but he was not at all interested in the destiny of other countries.
Right.
Except that he was worried that other countries could invade Italy. That was his anxiety. But the idea of solidarity among nations, of working together for ideas of humanity, this is much like, this is Mazzini, and Giuseppe Mazzini is my mentor when it comes to patriotism. And I think that this is an ideal that is the only ideal available if we want to avoid to see again the horrors of that the triumph of nationalism necessarily brings with it.
I see. Thank you for another fascinating interview.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for watching my interview. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas, then go join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to future lectures. Now, if you like this interview, I strongly encourage you to watch my other interview with Professor Viroli on Machiavelli. Machiavelli is a model patriot for Professor Viroli and will deepen your understanding of his advocacy for patriotism. You can find links to that interview and everything else we discuss in the description, as well as on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.